Chapter 27. Oleg was feeling the vodka flowing through his veins as he expertly piloted the Sokol around the treetops, firing bursts from the machine gun pods mounted to the craft. It handled well, much more responsive than a helicopter. Kostya had demanded that he kill everyone, and then land to retrieve whatever technology the man had stolen from the Chinese. He had nearly drained all of his guns of ammunition, and yet there were still armed enemies firing at him from the ground. The body of the Sokol was strong, with many layers of metal protecting him from these small guns. He tilted forward to find the little man who had just run out to the roadway, firing another burst onto the road and laughing as he dived underneath the cop car. More bullets hit the Sokol, and the onboard computer pinpointed the direction of the shooter, highlighting them on the display. He circled back to eliminate them, when a small hole appeared in the canopy, a bullet zipping by his head and smashing into the seat behind him. Glass sprayed into his face as it spalled off the window, and he screamed, shutting his eyes and turning the aircraft away. This was becoming less fun by the moment, and it was time to turn these bastards into shredded cabbage. He swung up the road and lined up the jet for a final strafing run. 7.62 millimeter rounds sent up puffs of dirt and gravel as he racked the entire scene, hitting the police car and the van that was parked across the road. The shooting stopped, and a red warning light flashed, showing that he was out of ammunition. There would be no landing. Oleg was a pilot, not a soldier. Kostya would be angry, but he would take it out on someone else, not his own brother. Oleg turned his aircraft and accelerated to maximum speed, moving back to the coastline as fast as he could. The sun was rising behind him, casting a shadow on the trees as he flew at 400 miles per hour back to the yacht. An audible alert sounded in the cockpit of the Sokol, and several warning lights started blinking, including the one labeled radio and the other labeled radar lock. Oleg hit the button for the radio, and a voice came across the speakers on frequency 121.5 megahertz. The voice was speaking American English, and it said, "Unidentified aircraft operating below 500 feet without transponder near William Fairchild Airport. This is ATC. You are in restricted airspace. Transmit on 121.5 megahertz immediately and identify yourself. Failure to comply may result in further action. Over." Oleg brought up the map overlay and realized that he was 10 miles further east than he was supposed to be. There was a very narrow corridor where radar was not sufficient to spot his aircraft, but he had strayed outside of that, and now they had him. His only chance was to increase speed and try to outrun whatever the Americans would scramble to intercept. The speed of the Sokol increased to 430 miles per hour, and the turbine screamed as he tried to get even lower over the trees. Chapter 28. Darrell crouched in the forest, about 50 yards away from the van that they had positioned across the road to ambush the cops. Everything had gone so well at first. They had killed one cop and were about to close in and finish off the other two people when the prisoner had suddenly started shooting at them. He had been shocked to see the cop and the prisoner both working together, quite effectively. Nick had been the first one to die, shot in the legs and the chest by the mysterious man dressed in ragged clothing after he dived out of the back of the vehicle and started shooting. Darrell had left Nick by the van where he fell and retreated, trying to flank to the left. It was very difficult to flank, thanks to the incredibly steep embankments on both sides of the road. He had chosen their ambush points specifically for those features, but their enemies had benefited from it. Everything had gone to hell when the mysterious gunship arrived, spewing fire from cannons mounted underneath its stubby wings. Darrell had seen similar machines operating from McCord Air Force Base, but this one looked different. For one thing, it was a very strange color, a mottled green on top and light gray on the bottom. There had been no markings of any kind on it, numbers or letters. It could have been the CIA, except that it also seemed to be shooting at the female cop and her prisoner. Darrell didn't feel like sticking around to ponder who was flying the death machine, so he quickly grabbed his pack and retreated further down into the dense forest with his rifle. Serena and Leo had dived back into the van, which was probably the worst place to be. No doubt they were now dead, cut to pieces by the final burst of gunfire before the mysterious machine flew away. The little cop and her lanky, homeless-looking prisoner had also managed to run away, but the cop had been injured pretty badly, and they were moving slowly. The Raggedy Man had come back and grabbed something from the cop car before they escaped, and Damien was sure that it was the secret technology that the Chinese were looking for. It would be simple to track them both through the woods, kill them, and take the prize for himself. Chapter 29. Special Agent in Charge Harvinder Patel stood on the gravel road, surveying the remains of the state police vehicle and the unknown panel van that was now blocking the roadway. He had let Hawking drive them back down, and he had nearly crashed into the scene. If Harvinder had not grabbed the steering wheel, the dummy would have driven them both off the side of the steep embankment. Harvinder had delegated the coordination effort to Hawking, telling him to call every single agent available to their location, as well as alerting the military and state police. The man had already spent most of his time on the phone, so he may as well make a couple more phone calls. Harvinder was a very good investigator, and he needed to examine as much evidence as possible immediately. The vehicle blocking the roadway was an obvious ambush, and it had been well placed. There was no way to go around it, and you couldn't see it until you were right on top of it. He looked inside the shredded police vehicle and saw the big black officer in the front, stone dead. Harvinder shuddered as he realized that it would have been himself in that position if they had taken the prisoner back. Sending the state cops had actually been a breach of protocol, and it had saved his life. The big guy looked peaceful, his eyes closed, and a relaxed expression on his face. A tiny gold cross was the only color that Harvinder could see, the shining metal glimmering from the man's chest. He reached out and almost touched it before pulling his hand back sharply. The vehicle itself had been absolutely obliterated by gunfire. Every window was shot out, including the front windshield, which was lying on the gravel in a shredded heap. Harvinder approached the panel van with his firearm drawn. No one had shot at them, and he could see no movement, but it would be foolish to make any assumptions. He cleared the perimeter, seeing the large exit holes on the far side of the vehicle. It had also been raked with gunfire, but it was strange. The metal poking out of the exit holes was pointing downwards, as though the shooters had been firing from higher up. The pattern of holes was also regularly spaced, making an almost perfect grid, 4 across and 7 high. He grabbed his cell phone and shoved it in his vest with the video running. Even after decades, the FBI still refused to issue most of their agents with body-worn cameras, so he would improvise. The inside of the van was hidden from view, including from the front. A small doorway covered access to the back, and it was closed. That was unusual, but this vehicle was obviously chosen for being nondescript. He quickly made a tactical entry to the rear doors, ready to start blasting anyone who might be hiding inside if they were trying to conduct another ambush. He was greeted with a gruesome sight: 2 bodies that were nearly unrecognizable as human. Several weapons were clutched in the hands of these poor slobs, and he quickly grabbed them, tossing them to the gravel outside. One of the rifles had been ripped in half by what had to be large caliber rounds. This was more than an ambush. It was a massacre, and both sides had taken casualties from a mysterious third party. The state cops were moderately well armed, usually carrying shotguns and carbines in addition to their Glock pistols, but this damage was far beyond any of that. It looked like a military jet or helicopter had come through, throwing thousands of heavy rounds into everything in sight. A roaring sound came to his ears as he stood with one foot inside the van, growing louder quickly. A dark shape passed over the cloudy sky as something briefly cast a shadow over him. He glanced up to see a small turbine-powered aircraft blast over the trees, the downdraft sending clouds of dust into the air. "It's back!" His mind raced as he looked around, trying to spot the closest cover to his position. If there was a gunship making another strafing run, he was standing directly in the kill zone. He quickly threw himself into the trees on the upslope side of the road, trying to use the curve of the ground to hide himself. The blast of dirt and rocks grew more intense as the vehicle got closer to the ground, until it finally stopped. Harvinder popped out of cover and sprinted towards the craft, his firearm at high ready. Hawking was standing 10 yards away, his weapon holstered and a perplexed expression on his face. Harvinder felt a shout grow in his throat, something like, "Get down!" or "Cover!" would hopefully be enough to jar the man into taking action to save his life. Instead, the words died in his lungs as a woman jumped out of the small jet and started walking toward his partner. It was Astrid Clinton, and as usual, she was angry. Harvinder remembered her face well, recognizing the tall, thin visage which was fringed by stringy blonde hair tied in a loose ponytail. It seemed that she had aged a bit, even in 4 years. She had been pretty, and still was, but the frown lines around her mouth were more prominent than before, and she was still shapeless, no nice curves around her business suit. She was all pointed angles and sharp edges. Curiously, Hawking was effusive and welcoming to Astrid, as though he somehow knew all along that the CIA was going to send an agent in a stealth jet and land in an active crime scene just minutes after it happened. He should have been demanding that she stay away, especially since the CIA had no jurisdiction on U.S. soil. He debated whether or not to acknowledge the old relationship, and the professional side of his mind won out. If she wanted to play cowboy, breaking the rules and crashing the party, he would play it right back. He marched up to the jet with a stern look across his face. "This is an active crime scene," he said loudly, looking at Hawking rather than Astrid. Astrid glanced at her former lover as he walked up the gravel road. No emotion played on her face, no recognition, no joy or anger, just the calculating look that indicated she was playing a role. Harvinder did his best to return the same look, but he wasn't a manipulative harpy, so it was quite a bit harder for him. "Thank you for letting me come out here, Special Agent Patel. It looks like you have quite a mess on your hands," she said smugly. "Yes, we haven't had time to start sorting evidence, so please don't touch anything." He walked up to her and stuck out his hand. "Good to see you again?" making it sound like a question rather than a statement. Her handshake was limp and unenthusiastic. "Yeah, same," she said dismissively. "Did you find anything yet?" "Right to the point, as always." Harvinder turned to Hawking and told him, "Please set up a perimeter. Let's use the Falcon up there as the northmost point and extend it 30 yards past the van. We've got 4 corpses gathering flies, and we need some resources here. Get Simmons and Fleck from Allenmore Hospital in Tacoma, and we're going to need as many staties as we can muster." He looked up at the sky. "We will probably have some foreign surveillance drones hanging around, so let's see if we can get some jamming happening." Astrid was trying not to look impressed. The last time she had seen him, he was nothing but a lowly field agent. Harvinder pointed right in her face. "You've got some explaining to do. Some kind of aircraft flew through here and blasted the heck out of everyone, including the cops. Is the military running some kind of operation?" She grabbed him by the sleeve, pulling him up the roadway to her vehicle. "It's much worse than that." When they were out of earshot of Hawking, she turned and said pointedly, "This was the work of the Russians. I think they are planning something big." Harvinder recoiled, and then laughed. "Right. The Russians just sent a jet across the Pacific to shoot up a couple of vehicles?" Astrid gripped his arms, and her hands were cold enough that he felt it through his shirt. "I'm serious, Patel. I saw the jet with my own eyes. It came from just offshore. There's probably a ship out there. These things don't have a lot of range." Harvinder surveyed the scene again, feeling conflicted. Part of him wanted to outrightly deny the possibility of foreign involvement, especially something so outrageous as killing police and shooting civilians. But he struggled to come up with another explanation that made sense. "We need to alert someone in the military. If foreign jets are attacking U.S. target, that's kind of their job, is it not?" Astrid's grip on his arm tightened, and he really looked her in the eyes for the first time in many years. He saw the shadow of the girl she had been then, hidden behind a hard mask of cold calculation. "We need to find that fugitive and whatever he was carrying. The Chinese are supposed to be getting it back, not the Russians," she said harshly. Harvinder thought that was a curious thing to say. "I thought the Chinese and the Russian were allies. You know, the whole BRICA thing." She rolled her eyes. "Right. I'm sure their governments are the best of friends. But we don't think this is the Russian government. It could be a third party trying to step in and steal tech that rightfully belongs to the Chinese." Harvinder brushed her arm away, but gently. "I'm going to pretend that you don't know far more than you should about this situation, especially when I asked you to keep me in the loop." "You know I can't tell you everything. Why would you even ask?" "Maybe because I'm trying to run an investigation involving a dead cop, a major corporate theft that the Chinese think we masterminded, and somehow there is now an armed Russian jet shoehorned into the story." Astrid stopped. "Wait, the Chinese think we did this?" Harvinder looked pointedly at her. "Are you saying that we didn't? These guys had nothing to do with the CIA? Nothing at all?" His question was a little louder than he intended, and he saw Hawking turn to look at them from the corner of his eye. "I swear to you this wasn't CIA. I wouldn't have hired some washed-out embassy security bum to handle something that could cause... well, it's not something we would do, in any case." He tried to decide whether he believed her, but in the end, it didn't matter. The situation in front of him was what needed his attention, not the machinations of spies and governments. "Fine, I believe you. I hope you really did come to help, because I actually need you to tell me what's going on here. This is a giant mess. There are 2 bodies in that van down there, but neither of them is our guy. One of the cops is missing too." He thought for a second. "Do you think he is holding the trooper as a hostage?" Astrid waved her hand dismissively. "I don't care. Hopefully they're both dead by now." Harvinder was aghast. "What's gotten into you? That's a horrible thing to say." She rolled her eyes and snorted. "Fine, okay. But you realize that every second we stand here jabbering, we risk someone else finding them before we do. If the Russians have sent a jet, they must also have drones in the air. We absolutely cannot allow them to get away." Harvinder was visibly angry, and he stalked away, forcing Astrid to jog to keep up with him. "Is that all you care about? Getting the stolen tech back? It doesn't even belong to us. It belongs to some company in China. I don't understand the urgency here." "We already know what it might be." Harvinder stopped, looking around. Hawking was on his phone again, too far away to hear. "Is this the part where you tell me that I'm not allowed to know what it is?" Astrid sighed and shrugged. She looked very tired, but there was a manic energy underlying every movement. Drugs, he thought. Amphetamines. "The president is about to take away your job, Patel, and mine too. Don't you care about stopping that?" Harvinder knew some of what was going on, but this seemed like a confession that the situation was much worse than anyone was willing to admit. When the Free State people had decided that New Hampshire was going to be its own country, it seemed they had started a bigger fight than they expected. "The president isn't going to close down the FBI. There's no way," he smiled. "The CIA, sure. I think he'll probably shut that down. What does this have to do with stolen Chinese technology?" Astrid looked at the FBI agent with eyes that shone with pure hatred. "We can stop him," she said, the words spitting through her teeth like ice chips. Harvinder was startled, and he realized at this moment that Astrid was talking about treason, an actual rebellion against the elected president. "Do you hear yourself, Astrid? That's the president. He's the boss. What exactly do you think you can do to stop the most powerful man in the country? This all sounds kind of—" He was about to add the word treasonous. Instead, he let it hang. She glared at him. "If you won't help us, then don't get in our way. Remember who put you here, Patel. I can help you or hurt you any time I like." He laughed out loud. "Oh, come on. You don't need to make silly threats. We're on the same team. Come, let me get my agents on task here. You can poke around if you want, but remember who's in charge. If you find anything, you will let me know." It was a risk to allow her to roam around an active crime scene, but he needed her keen eyes and the information that she was still hiding. She could stay, but the leash would be very short. Hawking glared at him, a sour look on his face. Harvinder flashed him a grin and gave a thumbs up. It was time to fire up the drones and start doing a sweep of the area. So he opened up the drone bay in the van and began to pluck the small devices out of their cradles, turning them on and waiting for the green connection light before flinging them up into the air. 6 of them should be enough for now, with 4 in reserve to switch out. If the fugitive and the police officer were still alive, he would need to find them quickly. There were 3 dead people around the ambush van, but there was no way to know if someone else had survived. He would need to assume that more bad guys were somewhere out there, chasing down the 2 survivors. The only chance they had to live was for him to find them first. Chapter 30. Austin Massey watched the sunset through the window of his small kitchen. His mom had put him on cooking duty, but his mind wandered as he stirred the bubbling tomato sauce over the high-efficiency magnet induction stovetop. "Austin!" His mother's voice brought him back to reality, and he nearly toppled the small saucepan. "What, Ma?" She came around the corner, a strangely excited look on her face. "Someone's at the door," she said in a not very quiet whisper. "Okay, well, why are you telling me that? No one ever came to visit him. Most of his friends knew him online exclusively, and that was quite preferable." "I think she's here for you. Come on, go. I'll handle the food." She gently pushed him toward the door, and through the glass he saw long, blonde hair. His heart raced as he slowly opened the door and saw Eleonora Bennett standing there, a small ceramic pot in her hands. She gave him a timid smile, and he tried to return it. Sorry, but can I borrow your microwave for a couple of minutes?" "Yeah, sure. Is yours broken or something?" She looked around and motioned with her head down the road. "The power's out again. It's been out all day." So it was. The sun was nearly set, and Austin could see that no lights came from any of the house windows all down the long street. "Grams thought that since you have the solar things, maybe you wouldn't mind?" She smiled again, and he thought he would literally die. He felt a flush running up his neck into his face. Yeah, okay. I guess, come in? He moved back to allow her to enter. The microwave is just over here. Sorry, we were cooking dinner too. Austin's mother was thankfully facing the stove, but she threw a cheerful greeting. Hi, Ellie. Nice to see you. The two women chatted for a bit, and Austin was relieved that his mother was making most of the conversation. He tried to keep himself busy doing things in the kitchen. Austin, can you put the dish in the microwave for her? They both looked expectantly at him. Yeah, okay. He took the dish and felt her soft hands lightly touch his own. They sat at the table as the food warmed up and began to talk. Although Austin felt unbelievably shy, he found himself warming up a bit as they spoke. Having his mum there was helpful. She was naturally talkative, but she also didn't dominate the conversation. He wished that he could be more like her, but he apparently was much more like his absent father. Ellie, how is your Grams? His mother asked the girl. Ellie looked a bit sad. Well, not great actually. It's been a bit hard. Austin was curious at this answer. The old woman had seemed to be made of iron, working out in the garden all day long. What happened to her? He asked. She has dementia, so she forgets things, and sometimes she acts out a bit. She stared at her hands intently as she recounted a few painful incidents where her Gramps had broken some dishes in anger. The conversation went on for some time, and finally Ellie stood. Austin was shocked to see that they had been speaking for over half an hour. It had felt like only 5 minutes. I'm sorry, I have to go. Grams is sleeping now, but I've got to wake her to eat something. I guess the food is cold now. She looked at the microwave, which still contained the ceramic dish. No, it's okay, we'll just run it again. Austin punched another 2 minutes on the screen. Ellie looked through the kitchen window, but nothing could be seen in the growing darkness. You should really pull your curtains. Someone might see your lights, and I dunno. Austin paused. He had never considered that they were basically boasting about having power when the entire town was subject to rolling brownouts constantly. Fortenza had been a very peaceful place, but that could change quickly. His mother reached out and drew the curtains shut. They turned off all but one light, and for just a moment they sat there in the near darkness, silently. I have to go. Ellie's voice was soft and musical. Austin felt physical pain as she got up and made her way to the door, holding the pot. He scrambled up to open the door, and she smiled at him as she passed through, the moonlight casting shadows across her face. Austin sat at the table, lost in thought, as his mother served him a plate of food. He consumed it without even looking at the plate. You need to go over there tomorrow. That girl needs some help. What? It took him a second to process what she had just said. Help doing what? She's got that cranky old lady and no one to help with cooking and cleaning and all that. She could use a nice boy to make a few meals and maybe pull some weeds in the garden. He said nothing, and nothing needed to be said. Just an hour ago, the thought of talking to Ellie would have made his head spin, but he had become very comfortable talking with her, and he desperately wanted to see her again. He would cook food for an army and pull every weed in Fortenza to enjoy just another 10 minutes of conversation. In the now dark kitchen, his mother's tiny smile was all but invisible. Chapter 31. Soraya felt someone shaking her shoulders as she lay in bed, the covers pulled right up under her chin. A light flashed into her face from somewhere, and she twitched away, trying to pull the blanket up over her face. Her arms would not respond to her brain, and nothing moved. A droning noise was moving through her ears, a sound without form or meaning. A dull ache surged through her arm, not a sharp pain, but steadily increasing as awareness slowly filtered into her mind. Sensations appeared in her body like stars in the sky. She felt her feet shifting and scraping against a hard material, and then her head was resting in a pile of branches. One of those branches was poking her in the ear, and it was unpleasant. The pain in her arm increased dramatically, and she felt a soundless gasp force its way from her lungs. Her eyes opened, but her vision was unfocused and hazy. The droning noise sharpened and became a voice, speaking right by her head. "Stop shifting around. I don't want this to start bleeding too much." She heard the words, but the meaning of them eluded her. Her booted feet scraped again, and she tried to move her arms. The right arm lifted an inch before sagging back to her side, but the left one was missing. She groaned again, trying to lift her head. A warm hand gently touched her forehead, pushing it back down. "Nope. Sitting up is a bad idea right now." That voice, deep and calm, a little raspy. She knew that voice from somewhere, but it was a faraway memory, buried under an ocean of fog. "Who are you?" The words formed on her lips, but no sound came from them. Time passed, and the fog of sleep remained settled over her mind in a comforting way. There was pain and discomfort, but the fog suppressed and disconnected her from it, as though it was someone else's pain she felt. Soraya coughed, feeling the raw dryness of her throat. She flailed her right arm, searching for the water that was always on her bedside table. Instead, her hand felt 1,000 tiny scratches, not painful or uncomfortable. Her eyes were glued shut, and at first she could not open them, no matter how much she struggled. Strength gathered in her second by second, and she kept pushing, feeling her consciousness rise as though she was surfacing from a deep pool of water. Her eyes finally opened, and once again everything was blurry. She began to sense that she was partially reclining against something firm, and she could not see the rest of her body. Everything in the area seemed to be some shade of green or brown. She blinked furiously, trying to force her eyes to be clear. It worked, and she was able to look around. It appeared that she was alone, leaning up against some wooden logs that had been carefully stacked behind her. The bottom half of her body, all the way up to her shoulders, was covered in pine branches. That explained the scratching feeling when she moved her right arm. She tried flexing both hands, and a jolt of pain surged through the left. She cried out, but her dehydrated throat was only able to produce a quiet groan. The pain seemed to be coming from the upper arm area, and she gingerly felt around her arm with her right hand. There were several strips of cloth wrapped firmly around the entire arm, tied off with small knots. It was tight, but not enough to cut off circulation in the rest of her arm. It burned when she tried to move it, so she rested it on her lap, pushing the pine branches down. Her gun belt was missing from her waistline, causing a quick surge of panic until she realized that it was tucked under her body on the right side. She felt the handle of the Glock pistol, and a flood of memories rushed into her mind. The chase, arresting the fugitive, getting ambushed, and a lot of shooting. After that, everything was foggy, but it appeared that she had been shot in the arm and seriously wounded at some point. She popped the magazine released and pulled it out of the Glock to inspect. By the weight, she could tell it was full, 15 rounds. She knew that she had fired at least one full magazine, reloaded, and then fired some more. She must have reloaded again, which meant that this was her last and only magazine. She forced it back into the butt of the pistol, feeling the click as it seated. Lying here, Soraya felt vulnerable. She decided to pull the Glock out of the holster and rest it on her lap under the branches. As she was doing this, the bush in front of her moved, and she froze in terror. It wasn't a bush at all. but a person, and he had been sitting right in front of her for who knows how long. He was disguised with branches and twigs sticking out of his clothing, and he was sitting so still that he might have been made of stone. Soraya could see nothing except his back. He was cross-legged on a flat stone, staring into the thick forest that surrounded them on all sides. It was the fugitive, of course, Damien Weber. She whispered his name to herself, and he slowly turned his head to look at her. He had fashioned a hat from thick blades of grass, and more strands of grass stuck out from the top. His face was intentionally darkened with streaks of dirt, and he had covered himself with vegetation. Up close, he looked almost ridiculous, but it was an effective camouflage. Damien smiled at her and shuffled to where she was lying. He was still carrying the rifle, and had Luther's pistol tucked into the waistband of his soiled and worn pants. "How's the arm? Any pain or tingling?" She reflexively touched the bandages that covered the wound, flinching in anticipation of pain. "It hurts." She nodded and tried to sit up a bit. "Can you flex your fingers?" She found that she was able to move each finger and nodded again. "The bullet didn't hit any bone or major blood vessels as far as I can tell. You got lucky." "Who the heck was shooting at us? Where did that jet come from?" Damien ran his hand down the rifle of the barrel in his lap. "This is a big mess, and it's getting bigger by the minute. You have no idea how bad it is." He paused for a second, turning to scan the forest again. "I suppose I'll just have to tell you the whole thing, and you can decide if you want to shoot me or help me." Soraya snorted. "I'm not going to shoot you. Stop being dramatic." Damien raised an eyebrow. Don't be hasty. You haven't heard what we did yet." A small smile curled at the corner of his mouth. The only thing that she could really see on his face, under the scruffy beard and dirt, were his sharply blue eyes. He was a little thin, but still a pretty good-looking guy. Soraya thought that after a shower, he might even be her type. "Fine. Tell me what you did." She rolled her eyes. "We broke into a Chinese university and stole some valuable technology. There were 4 of us, 3 Americans and 1 Chinese guy. One got killed when we were getting out, and the Chinese guy sacrificed himself to let us get away." His eyes seemed to cloud a bit, and his face looked sad. He swallowed and carried on with the story. "We got out of China, partially on foot and partially hidden in an old farm vehicle. Then we bought an old fishing boat in Russia, and we sailed across the entire Pacific Ocean in a little more than 2 weeks. That part sucked. I had to eat fish for the entire trip, and I hate fish. Anyway, I jumped out and swam to shore, probably 60 or 70 miles. Soraya looked dubious. "You swam 70 miles in the ocean in April?" "Yeah, I had a survival suit, so it was more like paddling, I guess. I still nearly froze to death. That water is not warm." She thought that some of this might be true, but it couldn't all be true. Why would he be truthful to her? She had shown up to arrest him, and as far as she was concerned, he was still arrested. Still, the entire situation was obviously very unusual, and he didn't seem like the average criminal, even if he did look a little homeless at the moment. "What was it?" He looked at her, puzzled. "What was what?" "Sorry, I mean, what did you steal? You said you broke into a university and stole some technology. What did you take?" Damien looked nervous, and his smile faded. "I don't know if I should tell you." He scanned the woods again, carefully moving his eyes across every shadow and detail. "The FBI was looking for you pretty hard. They sent the head of the Seattle office to come and get you in person." Ah, yes. Agent Harvinder Patel. Hopefully, they didn't ambush those guys, too. Who ambushed us? They killed my partner! Her voice cut sharply into the quiet solitude of the forest, much louder than she had intended. Are they still out there? She said much more quietly. Damien was still casually scanning his surroundings while speaking. It seemed like an automatic response for him. I don't know who was in the van. Gangsters or hired thugs or something, probably. The jet was Russian. Soraya thought she had misheard him. What? Did you say they were Russian? The jet was Russian. Sokol Mark V, I think. No rocket pods, just guns. So maybe Mark IV. I don't know who was in the van, but the Russian jet blew them into the afterlife. Anybody who was in that van is dead. Soraya pondered this, but it made no sense. The Russians were allies, or at least they had been for nearly a decade. The BRICA alliance had come to the rescue of the American government, lending them enough money to get through the financial crash. It made no sense that they would send armed aircraft over U.S. soil. Those jets only have a very short range, maybe 3 or 4 hours of flight time. It had to be deployed from somewhere very close. Maybe a small ship off the coast, or a truck disguised as a transport. Soraya eased back against the stack of logs, resting her head. She felt tired again, and she was ravenously thirsty. We need a rescue jet, and I need to get to a hospital. Where's my cell phone? Did you find it when you moved me? No, you didn't have a phone on you. You must have left it in your cruiser. The tone in his voice was oddly flat. Was he lying? She looked at the rifle in his hands, which was not pointed at her, but that didn't mean he wasn't ready to use it at a moment's notice. He mentioned being an Army Ranger, and she had seen his tattoo. If he was a thief, using his military skills and experience for crime, he might be willing to kill her if she got in the way of his escape. She slipped her hand around the butt of the Glock once more, feeling its reassuring weight on her lap. If necessary, she could raise and fire it very quickly. That he had left the firearm close to her, fully loaded, was curious. If he truly had criminal motives, he was risking everything by leaving her armed, with his back to her. Maybe he was trying to build her trust for some reason. It made no sense at all. I always keep my phone in my pocket. She watched him almost imperceptibly tense up and waited for some kind of violent response. If he was hiding something, a bold accusation might cause him to stop pretending, and then she would really know where she stood with him. Damien smiled and nodded, still facing the forest around. Yeah, I suppose you would. I don't have your phone, and I'm not kidnapping you. You're free to go any time you like. I don't know what they told you about me, but I am not that kind of guy. He turned and looked her in the eyes directly and boldly. She returned the stare just as boldly. I didn't have to bring you down here. I could have just left you behind. You should have left me. I'm sure they have agents and cops crawling all over that scene by now. He shrugged. I wasn't about to leave my battle buddy to get shot up by a Russian jet. Soraya felt angry. Excuse me, you're my prisoner, not my battle buddy. She pulled the Glock out from under the branches so he could see it resting on her lap. Thanks for trying to help me, but you're going into custody once they find us. The best thing that you can do is build a signal fire, and we'll wait for someone to come. They probably already know where we are. Damien said nothing, but his expression remained unconcerned. He continued to scan the woods as before. If they find us in the next half hour, okay, I'll give up, and you can bring me in. I won't resist. Why half an hour? That's about how long it will take for our little friend to get within ambush range. I don't understand. He gestured to the forest around them. They were sitting in a rocky depression, their backs to the side of the mountain. The slope in front of them was much more gradual, with a scattered view of the valley floor visible between the tree trunks. One of your ambushers from the van on the road. He's slowly making his way to where we are from over there. He pointed to a far-off clump of trees halfway down the slope. He's got a rifle, so he might try taking some pot shots if he's stupid. If he's smart, he'll get close enough to hit us both. Damien began to move around, gathering items into a makeshift bag, which Soraya recognized as being her plate carrier. She struggled to push the pine branches off her lap, and began to try and wrap her gun belt back around her waist without using her left arm, a much more difficult task than she expected. Just stay put, I'll help you out in a second here. No, you've helped enough, thanks, she said in a huff. She really didn't have any reason to be nasty, but for some reason it just came out. Damien didn't seem to notice or care, but patiently waited for her to stand up. She struggled to her knees, but despite her best efforts, she could not manage to stand all the way up. Her legs were shaky, and her knees kept buckling. Her face was flushed with anger, but she took Damien's offered hand, and he smoothly pulled her to her feet. He quickly buckled the gun belt, checking the magazine of her Glock to see if it was full. She tapped the magazine holsters and found that there was still one mag seated, and it looked to be at least half full. She might have 20 or so rounds, perhaps more. Soraya grabbed Damien's filthy shirt with her good hand and stared him in the eyes. Before we take another step, I'm going to tell you something, and then you're going to tell me something. His eyes glanced down at her hand, still gripping his shirt, and then back to her own. He nodded. First, you're still under arrest. We're going to get out of range of this mysterious hunter, and then we need to find a phone or a radio, something to call this in. I need medical attention, and you look like you could use a shower. Damien grinned and pretended to sniff his armpit. Now, you need to tell me what you took in China. Why is everyone trying to kill you? Why are the Russians shooting American cops? Damien looked shrunken, his face twisting in revulsion. Look, Officer Thiessen, I told you already. It's Soraya. My name, call me Soraya. She felt a flush travel up her face. It felt somehow wrong to tell this man her first name. She was supposed to be taking him into custody. She just couldn't bear to hear herself called officer by him one more time. His eyebrows raised, and his eyes got a little bigger. He looked much more like a little boy at that moment than a grown, retired Army Ranger. Okay, Soraya. He spoke her name slowly, as if testing it out. He reached under his shirt and brought out the small golden cross, dangling it in front of her. Up close, she could see something wrapped around the arms of the cross, like a small bundle of wires. She hadn't noticed it when she had seen it the first time. He took a deep breath and spent a moment scanning the surrounding trees. She looked where he looked, but she saw nothing. This is a drive, and it has a program stored on it. It's an incredibly advanced AI program. Something so advanced that the U.S. isn't within 10 years of developing, or at least I hope they aren't. It's capable of learning, reasoning, and making decisions. Manny called it a singularity, and he said it was really advanced. Something so smart, it could take over someone's mind and control them. Soraya frowned. How could an AI take over your mind? Damien pointed to the bundle of wires wrapped around the cross. This is a transmitter. I have no idea how it works, but it can make you hallucinate and see things that aren't there. Like virtual reality, but real. So real, you can't tell the difference. She thought about that for a moment, but she couldn't seem to understand why this was a problem. Damien continued, "This AI program can basically replicate human emotion, jealousy, anger, and all of that. Combined with the transmitter, you could make someone do anything you wanted to. Like, say, jump off a ledge, or shoot someone." She looked at him, her eyes wide. "How is that possible? Can you show me?" "No, it only works with the rest of the device, and we destroyed both of them. I used it twice, though, and it was absolutely terrifying. It made me hallucinate a man talking to me, and it looked as real to me as you do right now." Soraya released her grip on his sleeve, reaching her good arm around to grip the elbow of her injured limb. "Okay, let's suppose it can really do all of that. What exactly are you planning to do with it? This can't be the only one they have." "There's a guy living somewhere in Washington. I think he's in a little town called Fortenza. I need to get this to him, and he can figure out how it works. I guess, if we know how it works, we can create a countermeasure for it." He kicked a rock at his feet. "I'm not a criminal. I know I'll probably spend the rest of my life in a federal prison, and that's if the Russians don't kill me first." Soraya chewed her dry and cracked bottom lip as she pondered this. She was thirsty, and it was making it tough to think. "We need to get this to the FBI. They have lots of tech nerds working for them, so it should be easy for them to figure this out," she said. Damien was scanning the trees as she said this, and he made no response. A sudden tension in his body made her suddenly afraid. She frantically looked around the woods, but as she started moving, Damien grabbed her by her uniform shirt sleeve. He said nothing, and didn't move for at least 5 very long seconds. Then, without any warning, he brought the rifle up and fired 2 rounds at something off to the right. The gunshots echoed through the rocks and into the valley below. Immediately, a blast of wood sprayed from a tree, showering them with tiny splinters as a bullet tore into the trunk. "Time to move!" Damien shouted, and tossed her the remnants of her plate carrier, now modified into a backpack. He grabbed her by the wrist, and they moved into the trees, looking for cover and hoping to dodge the next round of gunfire. Chapter 32. Darrell had gotten pretty close to the little cop and the skinny man, moving slowly between the trees. Another 100 yards, and he would have been able to hit them both, firing off shots in succession. The guy had spotted him much sooner than he expected, and fired 2 rounds that came far too close to the tree he was hiding behind. He had gotten a single round off, but when he had the rifle back on target, the tiny 2x scope showed nothing but empty space. He cursed at himself for being so careless. The man had known where he was already and had been waiting for him to reveal himself. His heart was going crazy as he looked at the grooves carved by the bullets in the tree he had been sitting behind. Darrell was used to being the most dangerous person in any room, and no one had ever shot at him directly in his life. He briefly considered abandoning the mission and returning to Seattle, his mind telling him that something would get these 2 and do the job for him. The problem was that they had killed 3 of his people, and he couldn't just let them get away with that. He assumed that the jet plane that was shooting was some kind of government vehicle, but he didn't bother sticking around to find out after he saw the gun pods underneath the stubby winglets. It had flown away after a whole lot of shooting, and he had seen the cop being dragged by the skinny, homeless-looking guy down the side of the mountain. Darrell had gone back to the van and found Nick and Serena turned inside out by heavy-caliber gunfire, which must have come from the jet. If he let the cop and her friend get away, he wouldn't be able to fulfill his side of the bargain with the weird Chinese gangster. Worse, the technology that he was supposed to steal would end up in the hands of his worst enemy, the feds. The Chinese would certainly find out, and come after him instead. He quickly grabbed his pack, along with some supplies, water, food, and a small tarp to sleep under. Long ago, when he was a much younger, more innocent, and more obedient boy, his father had brought him out into the Washington mountains and forests to camp. At the time, it had just seemed like a fun thing to do, but looking back, he realized he was just internalizing the misogynistic manliness that his father was trying to beat into his son. After his father died, his mother took him to the shack, as she called it, and allowed her many boyfriends to abuse the young boy while she nodded in the corner, high as a kite. He had shed most of that internalized self-hatred at university, but the skills he picked up had remained. As he hiked down the side of the mountain, thrusting through the branches and shrubs as quickly as he could with the heavy pack on his back and the rifle in one hand, he had a sudden and rare surge of sadness. His father had died in a robbery, a victim of the white supremacy system that had turned black men against each other in a fight for survival. Darrell had watched his father bleed out in a Seattle park, 3 months after his 3rd year in college. The worst irony was that the park had a Black Lives Memorial Garden that had been growing weeds for several decades. The agony of losing his only reliable parent had morphed into a wave of anger that had pushed Darrell into committing his second murder. It hadn't been the black man who had killed his father, but his half-white sister that he killed, shooting her as she walked to school one morning. It wasn't that he hated white people, or at least he didn't hate them individually. He hated what they represented. White people had destroyed the U.S. dollar, making it hard for black people to buy food. White people owned a lot of the houses in Seattle, and they had built fences and walls around their homes to keep out the poor blacks. The time would come soon when his people, a group of several hundred now, and of all races, would extract reparations from the rich. Those nice houses would soon be occupied by Reds, and the former owners would never be seen again. It was anger that kept him moving through the forest, trudging over fallen trees, pushing through shrubs, and moving in the general direction that he thought his two enemies might be headed. He was quite sure that the cop was injured, which meant that she would not be able to keep moving forever. They would need to stop and rest, and he would finally have an opportunity to stalk and kill them. Whatever technology the fugitive had stolen would be his, and his people would make good use of it, either selling it to the Chinese or perhaps to any other bidders that might pop up. The revolution fire would spread in Washington into Oregon and California, and it would not take long before they were strong enough to make their own nation. They would drive out or kill the capitalists and build the workers' paradise that many before him had failed to materialize.